Every building has a story. Every crack, every stain, every surface holds a memory of someone who was there before you. The question is, are you looking? Welcome to the Gyaan Project. I am Kedar Nimkar. This year, the Gyaan Project will bring you a series of conversations with Matter. Matter is an architectural, design, and curatorial practice with deep interest in design discourse in India. I met today's guest at Frame Conclave 2025 last year in Goa. I am pleased to have artist Vishwa Shroff with us today on the Gyaan Project. Vishwa is a Mumbai-based artist represented by Tark Gallery, co-founder of SQW Lab, and she's exhibited everywhere from London to Basel to Tokyo. Her entire practice is rooted in drawing, not painting, drawing. And there's a big difference, as we'll find out. We talk about how she arrived at architecture through pigeons, why drawing is an act of editing, how she thinks camera captures too much or sometimes too little, or why boredom might be the most important creative tool you're not using. This is a slow and relaxed conversation to hear. Whether you're an artist, an architect, a creative, or just curious about how to see world differently, this episode is for you. Before we begin, subscribe to the Gyaan Project and Matter, follow us on social media, follow Vishwa on Instagram, and check out SQW Lab. All links are in the show notes. Let's begin. Welcome, Vishwa, to the Gyaan Project, and thanks for giving your time. It's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you so much, Kedar, for having me on the show. It's such an honor.
No, it's my honor. So I've divided this conversation into two parts. The first is about understanding your work, your thought process, and the second is about just some practical insights for those who would like to explore the kind of work you do, exploring expression through drawing. So yeah, there are these two sections. So I'll start off with the first one is that how do you define act of drawing, right? What according to you kind of qualifies as drawing?
Well, so my idea of drawing is a very wide one. I kind of arrived at it through a process of negation. To me, it's any image making process where kind of the thinking mind is working in with so it's not medium specific in that sense. Usually drawing is categorized as, certain mediums, be it pencil, charcoal, ink. But I do tend to, within my work, also use, watercolors and all sorts of other things on it. And I still consider it not painting. I still consider it drawing because I feel that the language that I use or the language that I'm interested in is that of drawing, not of painting. The painterly act is, in my head, a very flamboyant act, whereas the drawing act is a very simplified, a very simple act. And it's that act that is how I define drawing. So not by medium, but by the way in which I think about it.
And
I think
why do you
in a
say
way, there is that childhood. We all have that childhood idea of painter, which is gestural, which is kind of almost theatrical in many ways. And I therefore don't think that, of course, drawing can also be, and these days increasingly drawing is also gestural. And a lot of drawing practices are in fact focusing on the idea of the gesture. But to me, that is a much more painterly act. And drawing is a much more kind of thoughtful and writing act, kind of similar to the act of writing rather than a grand gesture. I distinguish it that way, but it's probably incorrect. Right? It's probably those lines are a little bit blurred if you take the medium out of the equation.
But why do you then how do you qualify that this is drawing and this is painting? Because essentially both are express or articulate your thing, right? So
I suppose in the end it does boil down to mediums as well. It's the act of using color, the color itself, whether it is being used in that kind of gestural way or whether the color is being used as an indicated rather than a gesture. I think to me, the idea of painting, or the one that I subscribe to, is the one that is born out of modern painterly acts, starting with Impressionism. So I'm not kind of going back into history where it's, looking at Renaissance and all of this, where the paint on the surface is doing something, is where it, for me, it becomes painterly
Mm.
versus kind of looking at. So basically, like post camera, the correct way to put it is that the history of definitions that I'm interested in is the post camera history of the distinction between drawing and painting.
Yeah, I think I have to like process this a little bit to understand where you're coming from. But then when you look at a building or a street or any space or some object or some moment to draw, what happens there, right? Like what are you actually looking for? Why you're looking for?
The subject matter uh, for me is very dependent on where I am. And I largely live, even vacation, etc., in urban spaces. I'm not a very, can't say I'm not nature loving, like that is so politically incorrect. So what ends up happening is that that becomes my subject matter. So I'm not thinking, oh, I'm interested in architecture as such.
Hmm.
What I'm interested in is the space that I occupy, and that is a largely built space. So most of the time, I'm kind of in a city, and I'm going, either through streets or sitting on a train, or the intercity experience is also pretty much in this kind of controlled environment, so to speak, a built environment in some way. So that then becomes a subject matter. And what I'm interested in kind of seeing is, how do I occupy these spaces, and what do these spaces, like what are the things that the built environment itself comes with, whether it is the memory of someone else having been there before me, whether that appears, that kind of idea of the occupied space appears through the renovations of those buildings, or somehow alterations of those buildings, or through just the fact that there are stains and cracks and other grimy things that exist in that space, or even just walking through the street. It's what I'm looking at, and how this act of looking at something can be minimized to the act of drawing. So it's, if
Hmm.
that's, I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I'm entering a territory where it's very tough to comprehend also, because my next actually question was also that why these states matter to you. Like, I mean, it's more of a personal understanding of the artist behind it, but like, why do these matter? Are there any connections between childhood memories or the way you
So
look at the world?
the way that I arrived at architecture, because it's not, or the built environment or spaces, I use those terms very loosely. But the way I arrived at it, joke is through pigeons. I was a little bit lost after I finished my master's, because until that point, like, when you do your undergraduation, I kind of knew I wanted to be a painter, or I wanted to be an artist in some way. The childhood fantasy was that of being a potter. This really fascinated me. To do pottery or to do any arts, you kind of go through the education of it. And by the time I finished my foundation year, you go through the motions in a way. And by the time I finished the foundation year itself, I began to not lose interest in pottery. I'm still very interested in pottery, and I sometimes play around with things. But I realized that my bigger fascination was to actually sit and draw, and not. I take it. It felt like pottery was too technical for me. That I was much more interested in conceptual thinking rather than technical thinking. And pottery does, not that pottery doesn't have conceptual thinking, but it also requires technical thinking, which I don't have, because it required chemistry and it required everything that I'd failed in school. So, but then you kind of go through the motions, and I finished my MA. All the way until that point, I was going to be an artist, and it's guided. It's kind of, you have, every time you kind of get stuck in thought, or you have your weekly or monthly crit sessions, you have all of this, so you're getting feedback. And when that stops, when you're kind of, you leave the institution, and then that stops, and you're kind of, the next question is, how does this work now that I don't have to wake up every morning at 8 o'clock, go to college, have my studio hours defined for me, have a deadline at the end of every week where we're doing group sessions, at the end of every month where we're doing individual when you don't have that structure, then how does this work? And at least back in our day, we really didn't have that kind of mentorship where you transitioned, or you knew how to transition from institution to profession. there is a lot more of it out there right now that you can tap into, and it's great. Like, I'm so jealous of it all. But we didn't have it, and although some friends did seem to have an idea, I didn't. And so I took a long break. I took a almost 3-year break from and tried my hands at other things. I was like, okay, I don't know how this works. I still need to pay my bills. And so I tried my hand at a whole bunch of other things and came to the conclusion that I really, really miss drawing. Because again, during the MA period, you experiment. I worked a little bit with installation. I came from the department of painting, so you kind of strictly worked with painting, and then with the MA, you get a bit more freedom, and so you kind of experiment with sound, and you experiment with this and that. And then when I decided that in doing other things, again, like this act of negation and doing other things, like I trained as a chef and then I was working as a chef. What I realized that I was saying anytime anybody asked me how life was going is that I miss drawing. I wasn't saying I miss painting. I kind of kept saying I miss drawing. And so when I came back and decided that no, I still don't know how this works, how I'm going to be a professional artist, I really do not know. But thank you to my parents for the support, and I'm just going to go ahead and draw and see where it goes. And then it had been such a long break, so I was drawing anything and everything. I lived in Baroda during that period, and I would go to the zoo and I would draw birds, and I would draw. At one point, I was just known for drawing pigeons because I was drawing so many because they would appear, they're everywhere. I literally joke about it that it's the pigeons that got me to architecture. After a while, I was bored of drawing pigeons. There is only so much you can do with them. And started to notice where they roost. Where do they sit? Where do they perch? And that is architecture. I mean, really, I've never seen very many rural pigeons. So that's how I arrived at architecture. But also at the same time, my parents decided to build themselves their final home. So we moved out of the house that I grew up in. And so again, at that time, I was really in a mood for a lot of play. And I kind of made this, it's a kind of unrealized, in the heap of unrealized projects, because after a while these things start to feel immature as well. But I made like little cartons, little scale cartons of the boxes that we were using to store our stuff in the time that it moves from one house to the other, and try to make like stop motion animation out of all of this stuff of kind of moving these boxes around and things like this. But that act of, I don't want to say loss, because I don't think of it as some sort of great, oh my God, my childhood home is gone kind of loss. It was a transition from one home to the next. And I started to think about memory for the first time, to kind of think, I lived here for 27 years. And I'm not going to have access to this space anymore because it's been sold. Someone else is going to occupy it now. And I have a particular way in which I remember it and I navigated it. And, we all have those kind of things like, ye room mein ye kiya tha, wo room mein wo kiya tha kind of memories. And obviously the next person, I don't know if they went ahead and, stripped it bare and redid an interior, but that's a possibility. Or they might live with certain elements of the house that we also lived with. And so, I started to think about those things for the first time around that time. So I think it was a combination of my parents moving as well as kind of me being bored of pigeons.
So you mentioned about interest in pottery, but it's too technical. I want to just go back to the first question. Isn't drawing also technical then? Or you have some command or some understanding that it's fun for you and you don't really worry about the technical aspects?
When I say pottery is technical, what I mean to say is that it has a certain element of chemistry that is involved in it. You need to know the clay. You need to know your medium very strongly. You need to have an understanding of the glazes of, ball china versus porcelain versus stoneware.
In fact, I remember my most recent conversation with Ayaz, and he said that even a 2-year-old or anybody can draw, right? And then that drawing is beaten out of us. Nobody is really nurturing that piece. Yeah. So if you want to just explain what is the kind of drawing that you engage with, from pigeons, then you move to noticing the architecture. In one of your articles, I was reading like there is the photograph can't really do justice, and hence it asks you to like draw also.
So, I mean, I said earlier what I said was post camera because the
Hmm.
trajectory of art history changes very
Hmm.
drastically once the camera comes into existence. So, that was the history I was referring to because once the camera comes into being, the first thing that happens is that artists begin to question that, what is our role then? If the camera
Hmm.
is, the act of painting changes at that point. But that's a history lesson.
Hmm.
For me, I have a very strange relationship with the camera. I use it, and yet I'm afraid of it very much because photography as a formal medium is such an incredibly difficult way because you are looking through an instrument. So you still need to figure out how you make the image that your eye wants. I find it very, very difficult. I feel like I've never taken a photograph that my eye and I are both in agreement. And yet I use the camera because I use snapshots, like detailed snapshots that I take of the space or the building or the street or any of that, bring it back into my studio. And then I'm working through photographs. And then the other thing that came to me from photography was this act of cutting. So we were traveling to Dungarpur, and it's not unique to Dungarpur, but I encountered it in Dungarpur. So we were traveling to Dungarpur, and the Dungarpur Palace, they have these portraits of ancestors about like that size,
Mm-hmm.
15 inches kind of size. So they're full body portraits, and then there are the photographic portraits that are cut, pasted on hard material, and then cut to form a
Hmm.
silhouette of it. It becomes a freestanding object. And I find this very fascinating. Of my mind then goes to artists like Joseph Koos and all who question what the distinction between the image, the language we use for the image, and the image itself and the object that the image is derived from. So it kind of raises those questions, which I find very interesting. So in a way, photography has been guiding me, but very scared kind of sheepish way.
No, but you
Mm.
also mentioned about then pigeons to architecture, right? So you want to explain that transition a bit because, yeah, I mean, I'm
There's
curious
not
to know
much
that.
more to that story except that I was looking at, I'd been drawing pigeons, I'd been thinking about narratives around pigeons. To me, the pigeon was the universal urbanist. He was there everywhere. You went to any large city, you encountered pigeons. It's kind of nondescript from one to the next, and not
Hmm.
like us. In a way, I was also very much personifying my pigeons to make the kind of very naive imagery that I was making at the time. So after a
Hmm.
while, I was like, okay, what next? And as you do, you sit around brooding at chaiwalas. And I kind of I was still looking at pigeons because that's what I'd been looking at for so long at that point, something like 2 years, that my eye would immediately spot a pigeon. And then I started to, for the very first time, notice where they actually sit beyond high tension cable, and kind of started following the flight of the pigeon rather than just seeing them right in front of me. And then
Hmm.
and you're led to architecture.
Interesting.
But I
So
also use
that.
that as a bit of a joke because my husband is an architect, and therefore I always get this question of whether I was drawn to architecture through him. And while I'd already met him at the time, and that might have something to do with it, in my story I wanted to be the pigeon.
Fair enough, fair enough. And I have seen some of your work online and some of them at Frame. So I noticed you kind of treat cracks and stains and marks, which in your mind they carry meaning. For a layman, it may or may not. But when, as a layman, if you start noticing the artist and understand where they are coming from, then you'll definitely connect what is happening, right? Like, so, in your case, what do scars tell about time, human presence? In your case, when you moved houses, did you go back to notice anything, or how are you making connections? Like, are those completely your imagination, or there's some reality connections with it?
So again, I go back to the camera for that. One of the things that the supposition that the camera comes with, whether it is true or false, the supposition that the camera comes with is that it is reality, that it is the moment of, it kind of has the baggage of documentation,
Hmm.
right? And I am drawing through these snapshots, and you can then get quite a bit of detail because I can zoom in, zoom out, take a photograph of just the crack. With that, there is a kind of possible way of reading those works as in this moment, in this time, while I was there, right? So in that sense, they become not documentation, but fixed in a particular moment in time. So what I have drawn is what I have seen on that or in within that period of time. So on that day or within that week, or but it would be very, because perhaps if you go back to the same building, say 10 years later, there might be a different crack. The same crack
Hmm.
might have been filled up. Altogether, there is a new floor because that also
Hmm.
happens. So it, in that sense, becomes a time capsule of that moment of when I saw it. At the same time, I like to think that it goes a little bit beyond I was here moment. That what it does is that it gives the existence of these things, makes you think of the narrative of the space without having to write a narrative or without having to
Hmm.
become a storyteller. Because your story, I mean, the other thing that I find very interesting is that storytelling is, especially when you storytell the same incident or the same, if you try and
Situation.
describe a place or a situation, there is always discrepancies in what you have observed. Or, I
Hmm.
mean, just to give you an example, if today, if say that you and I are meeting in my house, right? And then you are going to go and tell your friend, oh, I met Vishwa and we were here and we did this and we did that. And we spoke about this and we spoke about that. And I'm going to go and tell my friends, oh, I met Kedar and we were here and we did this and we did that. It will be 70% matching. There will always be a kind of slight discrepancy between what you have thought of from what I said, what you thought was worth taking home with you versus everything I've said. Similarly, with the spaces that we were sitting in, what you saw versus what I saw may be slightly different. And I find that very fascinating because it's also how I feel history is told and written, because it is from a certain perspective. And we kind of tend to forget that it's from a certain perspective. Again, like the baggage of the camera, we assume that history is factual, whereas history is, as I mean, I like to point it out that it is saying it's his story. And this idea of his story is what I love, which is why I draw the details. They are more or less accurate.
Interesting. And this act of drawing enriches you more than my recent I'm trying to understand this entire thing of speculative drawing and just getting into more drawing methods which are more ambiguous than, say, didactic or like really saying that this is what I want to say, right? I'm getting into the other, I'm understanding or kind of comprehending कि ऐसा भी कुछ होता है, right? So this act of critical looking and then just putting your thought, how does it enrich you? Like what happens? Does it like bring more nuance? Does it make you more sensitive? What happens to the artist?
Gosh, I don't know. Uh,
Hmm.
the reason I say that is because I also don't think of myself as an imaginative person. And when I say that, I don't mean that I'm not imaginative, but what I mean is that I'm not someone who is drawing from imagination, which a lot of artists do. I consider myself more observational and in that sense didactic rather than, fantastic or imaginative. Because I'm drawing things that I'm seeing. I'm drawing things that, places that I've visited, that I'm drawing things. And again, going back to that pigeon story, because every time you visit, whether the same place or a different place, every time you visit somewhere, you observe different things and your body moves in different ways. And it is really impacted what you see and how you perceive is quite like, at least for me, it is very greatly impacted about what else have I done that day. So if I've gone into the brightest room on a otherwise gloomy day in my life, that room is going to leave me with a gloomy feeling. I'm not going to like it for that day. And then on another day, if I've gone in, all slept very well, having taken my B12 tablets and all of that, and I'm like, and then I'm going to react to that room in a very different way. And of course, sometimes other way as well. You walk into some place really morose and it changes how you are thinking about it, because somehow architecture, and there's a lot of theory about it, of how architecture really impacts the body. But as a practice, it became a starting point through which I could explore many things. So I could explore this idea of memory, and I could also explore this act of looking, because at one point, I'd gotten very, very scared that, oh, if I'm peeping into windows, what if somebody is looking back at me? I will come across as a disgusting voyeur. So there is the act of looking, but also the act of being looked at. And then there is the movement within the space. So over time, for me, there have been these shifts. So there are times where, with things like the window works, I started out the window works as a point of access, because at this point I was living in Tokyo, and I didn't speak the language. I had moved there quite randomly, and I was alone for the most part of the day with no one to talk to and knowing nothing. And so I would walk around. And the thing that you see when you kind of just randomly strolling around the city rather aimlessly, what you encounter is a lot of windows. And so I started to draw them. I was like, I need to draw this to see what happens and where is it that it's taking my thoughts. And then once you start drawing it, you're like, what about, okay, I looked at it. But again, that moment of fear of what if somebody opens their window and asks me why I'm staring. And then you start to think about, so it becomes this spiral of fun thoughts. And then, of course, you remember other things because you've like decided that, okay, this is the rabbit hole I'm going down today, that you start to spiral in other ways. So with the windows, and then at that time, there are these Gujarati nursery rhymes that have this idea of the act of looking and being looked at, which is a kind of story between a girl and a monkey. And so I kind of thought about that, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. So I did a set of drawings which were called Bari Ma Bubbly, which refers to that nursery rhyme. Or so you can allow yourself to spiral in that way, which is and these moments of discovery of things and then the things you find because you're spiraling. That is what keeps my energy going.
Sorry, one last question before we jump into the second part. Like, do you qualify what needs to be drawn or what needs to be put out on a canvas, on a paper? And if so, like, what's the judgment criteria there?
Wow, I never thought this conversation will become so much about the camera, but bringing it back. So one of the reasons why I have a tensioned relationship with the camera is because the camera captures everything. When you take a photograph, sure, you have all your focal points and this and that and the other, but it has everything. And I say this also referring to an artist called Jyoti Bhatt, who has the exact opposite feeling of mine. Because he was interested in exactly the opposite of what I'm saying. He started to use the camera because he felt otherwise his eye was missing things. And that later on, when he would see the photograph, he would find something that his eye had missed. I am interested exactly opposite. And I feel that the camera captures too much, more than what my eye wants to see. And so the drawing allows you to edit. You can edit out what you don't want. So kind of another feeling that I really have. I love Bombay. I absolutely love living in Bombay. But I want to take a mop to it. I want to take a bucket and mop and clean everything. Drawing allows you to do this, to take a mop to things. You can clean it up. You can make it a little bit brighter. You can make it, a little bit more, only the bit that you want to focus on. Remove everything else. Because any drawing or any painting, or for that matter, any creative process is also an editing process. And like I said, the spiral that you go down, the lovely rabbit holes that the act of making allows you to go down, at different points in time of that spiral, you are also thinking of something feels more interesting than something else. And so you draw that, you've edited out everything else, but then that other thing that you didn't, in that point in time, you didn't think was interesting becomes interesting because you found an addition to that. I feel that even within that spiral, you kind of go back and forth, kind of going, oh, but I remember that now, and I want to go back to it and see if that will take me down a yet another spiral.
Yeah, now I can connect back to the first answer that you gave. It's about negation. So, yeah, even I'm exposed to a concept called as Niti Niti, which is not this, not this. It's a Vedantic concept, and you keep negating to reach the final spirit or the Brahman, as they say, right? Like you basically, this is not what I'm looking for, this is not what I'm looking for, and then you go down the spiral.
Okay, can I just add a little bit to that? Because the
Yeah.
point at the end of the day is that the act of making slows down the spiral. Let myself spiral. I can still do that. That's the kind of the beautiful meditative process, right? You can still spiral without.
Hmm.
But what the act of making does is that it's a pause in that spiral for that minute.
Hmm.
So in a way, like those pauses in spiral is what makes the work interesting. I think so.
You also have been kind of drawing, which has changed or will change because finally change is inevitable, right? So, how has your definition of permanence and transition changed? Because you pause, you draw, but sometimes what you're drawing might have changed. So, you still wait for it because it's a long duration, right? It's not like you got some idea and you got some insight and some epiphany moment and then you drew it. So how does permanence look in your work?
So for me, the spiral is through the sketchbook. So my sketchbook has all sorts of things in it that I've spiraled over. I mean, what I should have done, which would have gotten me through school, which I didn't do back then, I've somehow gotten very good at doing that in my sketchbook. And that is the note taking process. So I will even take notes while I'm watching a stupid Bollywood movie. Or I will take notes while I'm listening to, like, if I've gone for a concert or a lecture or any of that. And what ends up happening is that the disjointedness, because say in a day, right, you wake up and you start your day by making that note going, gosh, I don't know what I'm doing today. And then because you're looking to do something, you start to read a book and you make some notes. And then you're like, okay, I planned a concert with my friend, so I'm going to just go to the theater now and watch this concert. And then you've made some other notes there. And in between, you walked there. So you've seen something and you've taken a photograph. So the next day you come back and you make a quick drawing of that. And then it becomes like a database that you can go back to. So you kind of go back to it and you're like, okay, now from all this dust that I have collected, this one has specks of gold in it. The rest of it can just be where it is. Or
Very fascinating.
this is the rabbit hole that you go down for now.
From all that we are talking about, I'm getting some dust of gold, which definitely needs lot of thinking, lot of like sitting down with you, walking through your work, understanding, and then spending more time. The second part is mainly about the practical takeaways. So if you can take any example and just explain what you said just now in terms of sketching and then taking photographs, and then like how does it happen for someone to really start using it? Where does the process start and then how does it finally land up in a gallery?
Oh gosh, how it lands up in a gallery, I have no idea. So I'll start with that because I really have no idea. I think, the thing that it's correct. Although I find that no vocabulary so far has ever been able to define it very properly, where they say that the relationship of an artist in a gallery it may as well be a real marriage. And how you find your life partner, because I stumbled into it. I was introduced to my gallery through friends who had thought that my work was worth its two bits. Within a few conversations, it was very much an arranged marriage situation. So within a few meetings, we kind of realized that no, this was looking good. And as you do in these arranged marriage situations, we went on a long date, which was that we conducted it, and that was with my partner. Two of us together conducted a small workshop in the gallery, which allowed us to spend a little bit more time together with the gallerist. And at the end of that workshop as well, when she asked me if I would like representation, I kind of started to cry because nobody had asked me that before. So it was very much in that sense an arranged marriage. But I think it is a little bit like that, where it is very much like finding a life partner, where you figure out whether what the gallery wants to do and what you want to do in life is meeting somewhere, whether it feels like a that you can grow together. I mean, when sometimes when you hear these lovely, as I said, these kind of mentorship programs, what they are saying is correct. I
Hmm.
just feel that none of us still have the vocabulary to kind of go, if you do step one, step two, step three, step four, you're going to have a gallery.
Yeah,
So
that's
with
not.
the, yeah. And the other thing that I think, which also I kind of learned through scoldings, I'm very, very, very grateful to all my mentors for that, was the idea of discipline. That even you don't do anything that day, you still be in a place where you can.
Hmm.
So you be in, whether that place is your studio. For me, it is very much a studio. And because the best, and, this is something I take from my father, that the best way to, come get over a creative block is to be bored, because then you will start to find things to self entertain.
Yeah,
So to be
I think
bored
that's
is important, I think.
yeah. I'm in that phase right now, and I'm trying to just stay with it. Really interesting. So it gives a nice segue to the second last question. Is that so? In your daily practice, how do you train yourself to be slow? Today, there's so much stimulus outside that it's very important to introspect, stay slow, and often the mundane can be very profound. So, you want to share your thought about it, and how do you kind of build it?
Fortunately, I'm still that generation, that didn't grow up with so much fast media. It wasn't part of my habit. So it's very easy to kind of not be part of my habit because it never was. So I really don't know how. No, I didn't like when we grew up, we had that one TV, which was also, in my case, it was in my parents' bedroom. How much you had access to it was already very limited. And then you had the one channel, and Sunday morning was the best thing ever. But we didn't grow up with having external stimulation on your fingertip. And so
And do you think it has helped?
I don't know, because I mean, I say I don't know for two reasons. That one is that very genuinely, I don't know how, because I'm not that kind of analyst. So I don't
Hmm.
know how, say, someone who is born in 2013 or 2018 or like this is going to, how like the social media and generally having quick access to media is going to impact them. I really have, and again, it's a subject that has not been very much of keen interest to me. And so I haven't
Hmm.
really read much about it either. You do, of course, see, once in a while, one of these, Tim Cook never allows his children to use the iPhone or whatever. Once in a while you see
Hmm.
this kind of stuff. But beyond that kind of popular media through social media, I have not dwelled into how this will impact.
Hmm.
Forget the creative process, any process. And the other way as well, that I kind of grew up in a way that, I mean, we all did. Our generation grew up in a way that we are not yet, don't have the, as they say, addiction.
मुझे अभी थोड़ा आ गया है, but I have to stay away.
I mean, it's not like I don't engage in social media, or that I'm not
Hmm.
watching reels, or that I'm not sharing those reels, or that, it's not, I'm not doing it. But like making the drawing or making the work is a lot more stimulating. And then that is just before bedtime or just when you're in the loo or,
Yeah.
yeah.
I
So,
read somewhere like एक post ही था Instagram पे like the act of creation, the act of making is so human, and that's why consumption leads to kind of little, it makes it boring.
because,
So I think
that as all of us do, I love binge watching things.
hmm.
Right? But I'm unable to say binge watch for more than two, three, four episodes at a time, because after that I'm bored. I'm a very fidgety person, so I need to do something.
Hmm.
So if I'm not, if I'm not drawing or painting, then I will cook something or clean something, or I'm a very fidgety person that way. So that
Hmm.
is not to say
Hmm.
that I never binge watch, or that I don't have a Saturday where I've slept all day and with my laptop on my knees and watched endlessly reels, or I do all of that, but or
Yeah.
play Candy Crush endlessly.
Nice, nice. Cool. I'll conclude with one because I have your time. I'm going to like try and get maximum insights as possible. So, for young artists, any habit of that they can build to see things better, see things differently, see things the way they are.
I think that comes how you develop your own way of looking comes by itself. But the two things, one is discipline. Just be there, be thinking about it, be, talking about it, be making it, be reading it
Hmm.
every day, every single day. Make
Hmm.
it the way in which you brush your teeth. Hopefully, you do every day. It needs
Beautiful.
to be that kind of habit. So, if for you your material is coming via walking, then walk every day. Whatever it is, do it every single day. And the other thing is just don't give up when it feels like, oh, this is not working out. You can have, like all of us have, piles and piles of discarded stuff and rejections and application failures. All of that happens. So like just be at it every day.
Cool. I think we'll conclude on that very, very high note because that inspires me a lot. There are moments where even I feel like कोई देख नहीं रहा है podcast, कोई सुन नहीं रहा है ज़्यादा, but it's like it's just you have to do it kind of situation.
Yeah, no, it is almost, it's an addiction. It is a compulsion. It is so it's a very, I think so that art making is a very addictive thing to do, because once you start, there's no stopping point. There's no exit strategies. So
Correct.
there's no retirement. There is no, none of that. You just,
It was great talking to you, Vishwa. Thanks a lot for giving your time.
thank you.
And
Thank you so much.
no, it's been a pleasure, and I'm think I'll keep this the way it is in terms of just editing small pieces. After very long, I had a great chat of slow conversation, understanding the artist. So thanks a lot.
Thank you. And I hope to see you in person soon.
Yes, absolutely. That was Vishwa Shroff. And what a conversation. Such interesting and powerful ideas of any creative practice. What struck you the most in this conversation? Let me know in the comments. This is an ongoing series with Matter. Matter is an architectural design and curatorial practice with deep interest in design discourse in India. Subscribe to the Gyaan Project and Matter. Follow Vishwa on Instagram and SQW Lab. All links are in the show notes. See you in the next one. Stay curious.